Chapter 1. She wasn't supposed to feel anything. Not curiosity, not hesitation, and definitely not attraction. I repeated those words in my head like a promise I couldn't afford to break. Because from the moment I stepped into that glass tower, everything had already been decided. My name is Elena Carter, and I wasn't here to build a career. I was here to destroy a man. Alexander Reid, the youngest CEO in the country. Cold, calculated, untouchable. To everyone else, he was a symbol of success. To me, he was the reason my family lost everything. The reason my father spent his last years chasing debts he could never repay. The reason I learned, far too early, that powerful men don't fall unless someone is willing to push them. That someone was me. Getting into Reid Corporation hadn't been easy, but I made sure I was exactly what they were looking for: efficient, composed, forgettable. The kind of person no one would look at twice. I spent months preparing, studying his company, memorizing his habits, learning everything there was to know about the man I was about to get close to, because this wasn't just about revenge. It was about precision, control, timing. And when the email came, "You've been selected as the CEO's personal assistant," I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just stared at the screen, knowing there was no turning back. My first day at the office felt like stepping into another world. Everything was polished, controlled, perfect, just like him. The employees spoke in hushed tones, their movements careful, like they were constantly aware of his presence even when he wasn't there. "You'll be working directly under Mr. Reid," HR had told me, their voice lowering slightly when they said his name. "He expects excellence." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had already planned for that. What I hadn't planned for was the moment I finally saw him. It happened faster than I expected. 1 second, I was being led through the executive floor. The next, the doors opened, and there he was, standing by the window, city skyline stretching endlessly behind him. Tall, still, unreadable. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. This was him. The man I had spent years hatting. The man I had built this entire plan around. "Mr. Reid," someone said beside me. He turned. And just like that, everything shifted. His gaze landed on me, sharp, assessing, impossible to escape. It felt like he was seeing straight through me, peeling back every layer I had carefully built. My heartbeat stuttered, but I forced myself to stay still. Calm, controlled, invisible. "Your new assistant," the voice continued. Silence followed, heavy, intentional. Then he spoke. "I see." His voice was low, even giving nothing away. No interest, no curiosity, nothing, just indifference. Good. That was exactly what I needed. Because the closer I got, the easier it would be to uncover the truth. The easier it would be to destroy him. I met his gaze, steady and unwavering, even as something unfamiliar stirred in my chest. This was just the beginning, and I wouldn't fail. I couldn't, because I wasn't here to feel anything. I was here to end everything. Chapter 2. I expected Alexander Reid to be exactly what everyone said he was: cold, ruthless, impossible to approach. A man who built his empire by crushing anything in his way. That was the version of him I held on to, the version I needed to believe in. Because if he was anything less than that, then what I was about to do wouldn't feel justified. My first week working under him should have confirmed everything. The schedule was relentless. Meetings stacked on top of each other, decisions made within seconds, no room for error. He didn't repeat instructions. He didn't tolerate delays. And yet, he never raised his voice. That was what unsettled me the most. There was no anger, no visible frustration, just quiet expectation. A single glance was enough to make an entire room fall silent. People didn't fear his temper. They feared disappointing him. I watched him closely, more than I should have. The way he handled negotiations, precise, controlled, never wasting a single word. The way he listened, really listened before making a decision. And the way he carried himself like he was always 10 steps ahead of everyone else. This was the man I came to destroy. I reminded myself of that every time I stepped into his office. "Your coffee," I said one morning, placing it on his desk exactly how he liked it. Black, no sugar. He glanced at it briefly before looking back at his screen. "Thank you." Simple, polite, distant. That should have been the end of it, but as I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. "You've adjusted quickly." I paused. That wasn't something I expected from him. "I try to be efficient," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Another silence followed, but this one felt different. He looked up then, his eyes meeting mine in a way that made it difficult to breathe. Not cold, not dismissive, just observant. "Efficiency isn't the same as understanding," he said quietly. My fingers tightened slightly at my sides. Was he testing me, or had he already seen through something I hadn't realized I exposed? Then I'll make sure to understand better, I answered. A beat passed. Then he nodded once, returning his attention to his work as if the moment had never happened. But it stayed with me, longer than it should have, because it didn't fit. None of it did. He wasn't careless. He wasn't arrogant. And he certainly wasn't the kind of man who destroyed others recklessly. That realization crept in slowly, unwelcome, and persistent. I saw it in the way he treated his employees, not kindly, but fairly. I saw it in the way he rejected deals that felt off, even when they promised massive profit. And I saw it in the quiet moments no one else paid attention to, like the night I stayed late to finish a report. The office was nearly empty, the lights dimmed, the silence heavy. I didn't notice the time until a voice broke through my thoughts. "You should go home." I looked up, startled. He was standing there, coat draped over his arm, expression unreadable as always. "I'll finish this first," I said. "It can wait." His tone wasn't harsh, just certain. I hesitated, unsure why that mattered. "I don't mind staying." A pause, then more quietly, "That wasn't a request." I blinked, caught off guard, not by the words, but by the underlying meaning. It wasn't control. It wasn't authority. It was concern. And that was the moment something shifted. Because for the first time since I started this, a thought crossed my mind that I didn't want to acknowledge. What if the man I was trying to destroy wasn't the man I thought he was? Chapter 3. Getting close to Alexander Reid was supposed to be calculated, controlled, intentional. Every step I took had a purpose, every word carefully measured, every interaction part of a larger plan. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like strategy and started feeling natural. That was the first warning sign. It began with late nights. At first, they were unavoidable. His schedule demanded it, and as his personal assistant, so did mine. Meetings ran long, documents needed reviewing, last-minute changes became routine. Eventually, the entire office would empty out, leaving only the faint hum of lights and the quiet rhythm of our presence, just him and me. At first, we barely spoke beyond what was necessary. "Send this. Reschedule that. Prepare the file." Simple, direct, professional, exactly how it should be. But silence, I learned, had a way of changing things. It stretched, softened, shifted into something less rigid. Less formal. One night I stayed later than usual, organizing a stack of contracts that had to be finalized by morning. I didn't notice how much time had passed until I heard movement behind me. "You're still here." His voice was low, cutting through the quiet. I looked up to find him standing near the doorway, his jacket already on, as if he had been about to leave. "I have a few things left to finish," I replied. He stepped inside, his gaze briefly scanning the documents in front of me before returning to my face. "That can wait." I shook my head lightly. "I'd rather complete it now." A pause. Then, without another word, he moved past me and returned to his desk. I frowned slightly, confused, until I realized he wasn't leaving. He stayed. Not working on anything urgent, not rushing through tasks, just there. The minutes passed, stretching into something quieter, something heavier. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I didn't feel the need to rush anymore either. That night set a pattern. We began staying late more often, not because we had to, but because neither of us seemed in a hurry to leave. Sometimes we worked in silence. Other times, the silence broke into conversation. Small things at first, neutral topics, safe ground. "You organize everything in categories," he said once. Watching as I arranged files on his desk. "It's more efficient. Or more controlled." I glanced at him. "Is that a problem?" He held my gaze for a moment before answering. "Not necessarily." It was subtle, the way our interactions shifted. Less rigid, less distant. He began asking questions, not personal, not intrusive, but enough to blur the lines. And I found myself answering. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. That was the second warning sign. I noticed things too. Things I shouldn't have cared about. The way he loosened his tie after long meetings. The way his voice changed slightly when he spoke to me compared to others. The way his eyes lingered, just for a second longer than necessary, as if he was trying to figure something out. One evening, I nearly dropped a stack of files when one slipped from my grip. Before I could react, his hand caught mine, steadying both me and the papers. The contact was brief, but it was enough. "Careful," he said quietly. I nodded, pulling my hand back a little too quickly. "I'm fine." He didn't respond immediately. His gaze stayed on me for a moment longer than usual, and in that moment something shifted again. Because for the first time I felt it, not strategy, not calculation, something else, something dangerous. And as I turned away, trying to steady my thoughts, one realization settled heavily in my chest. I was getting closer to him, much closer than I ever planned. And I wasn't sure if I still had control over what that meant. Chapter 4. I told myself I was still in control, that everything unfolding between Alexander and me was intentional, calculated, part of the role I had carefully built. But control is a fragile illusion, and I began to feel it slipping in the smallest, most dangerous ways. It started with details, insignificant things that shouldn't have mattered, yet refused to leave my mind. The way he remembered how I organized his files without needing to check. The way he anticipated my next move before I made it. The way his voice, always composed and distant with others, carried a subtle softness when he spoke to me. "You've already prepared the revised draft," he said one afternoon, glancing at the document I had just placed on his desk. "Yes, before I asked for it." I hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was predictable. A faint pause followed. Then, almost imperceptibly, the corner of his lips shifted, not quite a smile, but something close. "You think like I do." The words settled heavier than they should have, because that wasn't part of the plan. I wasn't supposed to understand him. I was supposed to observe, analyze, and dismantle, not align. That realization lingered long after I left his office. It followed me through the rest of the day, through every task, every interaction, until it became impossible to ignore. Something was changing, and I didn't know how to stop it. The next shift came in moments I couldn't predict. Like the evening I stayed late again, the office dim and quiet, the city lights flickering beyond the glass walls. I was reviewing a report when he stepped out of his office, his presence immediately altering the atmosphere. "You're still here," he said, the same words he had used before, but this time they felt different. Less like observation, more like expectation. "There's still work to finish," I replied. He walked closer, stopping just beside my desk, too close. Close enough that I could feel the subtle warmth of his presence, the quiet steadiness that always surrounded him. "You've done enough for today." I shook my head. "I don't mind." Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't empty. It felt deliberate. Then, unexpectedly, he reached past me, picking up the file I had been working on. His arm brushed lightly against mine. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a sharp awareness through me that I couldn't ignore. "This can wait," he said, placing the file back down. "You don't have to prove anything." My breath caught slightly, because that was the problem. I wasn't trying to prove anything to him. I was trying to destroy him. And yet, in that moment, it didn't feel that way. It felt like something else entirely, something quieter, something far more dangerous. I stood there, unable to respond immediately, my thoughts tangled in a way they had never been before. He studied me for a moment, his gaze steady, searching, but not invasive, not forceful, just present, as if he was waiting for me to say something I didn't even understand myself. I looked away first. "I'll leave soon," I said softly. He didn't respond right away. Then, after a pause, "Don't stay too long." Simple words, but they stayed with me long after he walked away. Because they didn't feel like an order. They felt like concern. And that was when the truth finally settled in, impossible to deny any longer. The plan I had built so carefully was starting to crack, not because I was failing, but because I was changing. And the more time I spent with Alexander Reid, the harder it became to remember why I was supposed to hate him in the first place. Chapter 5. Doubt wasn't part of the plan. It had no place in the careful structure I had built, no role in the mission I had spent years preparing for. And yet, the moment I finally got my hands on the information I had been searching for, it was the only thing I could feel. It started with a file, buried deep within the company's internal system, hidden behind layers of access restrictions that would have gone unnoticed by anyone who wasn't actively looking. But I was looking. I had always been looking. That was why I was here. Late that night, with the office nearly empty and the silence thick enough to press against my thoughts, I sat at my desk and opened it. My pulse quickened as lines of data filled the screen. Financial records, transactions, partnerships, everything I had expected, and yet not what I needed. I scrolled slowly, carefully, my eyes scanning every detail, searching for something, anything, that tied Alexander Reid directly to what had happened to my family. The collapse. The loss. The years we spent trying to recover from something we never fully understood. This was supposed to be the moment where everything became clear, where the anger I carried would finally have a target I could prove. But the more I read, the less certain I became. Nothing was wrong, not in the way I expected. The numbers were clean. The deals were legitimate. The timelines aligned too perfectly to suggest manipulation. If anything, it looked like the company had grown through strategy, not sabotage. My grip tightened around the edge of the desk. That didn't make sense. It couldn't. I had built everything on the belief that he was responsible, that his success came at the cost of my family's downfall. But this didn't prove that. It didn't prove anything. A quiet frustration settled in my chest, sharp and unfamiliar. Because for the first time since this began, I didn't feel closer to the truth. I felt further from it. "You're still here." His voice broke through the silence, low and steady. I froze for a fraction of a second before turning slightly. He was standing at the entrance to the office, his gaze already on me, unreadable as always. "I had something to finish," I said, quickly minimizing the screen before he could see, a habit, a reflex. He stepped closer, his presence filling the space in a way that made it harder to think clearly. "It can wait." The same words he had said before, but this time they landed differently, because I didn't want to wait. I needed answers. "I'll leave soon," I replied, keeping my voice even. He didn't argue, didn't question me. He just stood there for a moment, watching me in that quiet, observant way that had begun to unsettle me more than anything else, as if he knew there was more I wasn't saying. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back toward his office. And just like that, the moment passed, but the doubt didn't. I looked back at the screen, at the information that should have confirmed everything I believed, and didn't. My chest felt heavier than before, my thoughts no longer as clear, as certain, as they had been when I started this. Because if Alexander Reid wasn't the man I thought he was, then what did that make me? The question lingered, unanswered and unwelcome. And for the first time, I found myself hesitating. Not because I was afraid of failing, but because I was no longer sure what success was supposed to look like. Chapter 6. I didn't notice when the line blurred. There wasn't a single moment, no clear point where everything shifted from calculated distance to something far more dangerous. It happened quietly, in fragments, in the spaces between words and the silences that followed them. But that night, that was when I could no longer pretend nothing had changed. It started like every other late evening. The office was nearly empty. The city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass, reflecting faintly against the polished surfaces. I was finishing the last of the reports, my focus fixed on the screen, trying to ignore the steady awareness of his presence just a few steps away. Alexander hadn't left yet. He rarely did when I stayed late. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. Now I wasn't so sure. "You missed a section," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. I looked up, momentarily caught off guard. He was standing beside my desk, closer than I expected, his gaze fixed on the document in front of me. "Where?" I asked. He leaned slightly, pointing to a line on the page. "Here." His hand brushed against mine as he did. It was brief, barely noticeable, but it was enough. My breath caught just for a second. I pulled my hand back instinctively, my fingers tightening slightly around the pen I was holding. "I'll fix it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He didn't move away immediately. Instead, he stayed there, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, the quiet steadiness that always seemed to surround him. It was distracting, more than it should have been. I forced myself to look back at the screen, trying to regain my focus, but it was already slipping. Because I was aware of him in a way I hadn't been before. Not as a target, not as a mission, but as a person. And that was the problem. "You've been distracted lately," he said after a moment. The words were calm, but they landed with unexpected weight. I hesitated, my eyes still on the screen. "I'm handling everything." "That's not what I asked." Silence followed, thick, pressing. I could feel his gaze on me, steady and searching, as if he was waiting for an answer I wasn't ready to give. Because the truth wasn't simple anymore. The truth was that I didn't know what I was doing. That the plan I had built so carefully no longer felt as solid as it once did. That every moment I spent with him made it harder to remember why I was here in the first place. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to respond. "It's nothing." A lie, a weak one. He didn't call me out on it, but he didn't accept it either. I could tell. There was a shift in the air, subtle but undeniable, as he straightened slightly, his gaze never leaving mine. "You don't have to keep everything to yourself," he said quietly. My chest tightened at the words, because they weren't what I expected. There was no pressure, no demand, just something softer, something real. I looked up at him then, really looked at him, and for a moment everything else fell away. The office, the plan, the past, it was just him, just us, and the space between us that suddenly felt too small. "Why?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "Because I trust you." The words hit harder than they should have, because he shouldn't have trusted me. Not like this, not when everything about me was built on lies. My throat felt tight, my thoughts unsteady in a way they had never been before. You shouldn't, I said softly. It wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't something I meant to say, but it was the truth. He held my gaze unmoving. I decide who I trust. Simple, certain, final. And in that moment, something inside me shifted irreversibly, because this wasn't just a mission anymore. It wasn't just about revenge or truth or the past I had been holding onto for so long. It was about him, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. Chapter 7. I should have been more careful. Every step I had taken, every decision I made since the beginning was supposed to be precise, controlled, invisible. That was the only way this worked. That was the only way I could get close enough without being seen for what I truly was. But somewhere along the way, I had started to forget that. Or worse, I had stopped caring as much as I should have. And that was how everything unraveled. It happened on a night that felt no different from any other. The office was quiet, the lights dim, the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass walls. He had left earlier than usual, or at least that was what I thought. I waited longer than necessary before moving, making sure no one else was around before stepping into his office. My pulse was steady, my movements practiced. This wasn't the first time I had searched for answers in the spaces he left behind. But tonight, I needed something definitive. Something that would finally end the doubt that had been growing inside me. I moved to his desk, opening the files I had memorized, navigating through systems I had learned to access without leaving a trace. Everything felt routine, familiar until it didn't. Looking for something specific, the voice came from behind me, low and unmistakable. My entire body stilled. For a second, I couldn't move, couldn't think. Then slowly, I turned. He was standing there just inside the doorway, his gaze fixed on me. Not surprised, not confused, just watching like he had been expecting this. My heartbeat quickened, but I forced my expression to remain calm. I was organizing the files, I said, a lie too obvious, too late. Silence filled the space between us, heavy and unyielding. He stepped closer, each movement deliberate, controlled. You've been doing that a lot, he said. My fingers tightened slightly at my sides. It's part of my job. Another step closer. Is it? His tone didn't change, but something beneath it did. Something sharper. Something that made it impossible to hold on to the lie any longer. I held his gaze, refusing to look away even as the weight of the moment settled heavily around me. What do you want me to say? I asked quietly, because at this point there was no point pretending. Not when he was looking at me like that, like he already knew. A pause, then, the truth. The word lingered between us, heavier than anything else. My chest tightened, my thoughts racing in a way they hadn't since the day I walked into this building. This was it. The moment everything fell apart, I could deny it. I could keep lying, but something in his expression told me it wouldn't matter. He wouldn't believe me because he had already seen enough. You already know, I said finally. The words came out softer than I expected, but they were steady, honest, for the first time since this began. His gaze didn't waver. I want to hear you say it. My breath caught slightly, because saying it out loud meant there was no going back, no pretending, no control, just the truth. I came here for a reason, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. To find something, to prove something. I swallowed, forcing myself to continue. To destroy you if I had to. The silence that followed felt endless, but he didn't react the way I expected. No anger, no shock, no betrayal, just quiet understanding, and that was what unsettled me the most. I know, he said, 2 words, simple, final. They hit harder than anything else could have. My eyes widened slightly despite myself. You knew, he nodded once, his expression unchanged. For a while now. Everything inside me stilled, because that wasn't how this was supposed to go. He was supposed to confront me, to fire me, to hate me, not this, not calm acceptance, not quiet certainty. Then why? My voice faltered slightly. Why didn't you stop me? For the first time since the conversation began, something shifted in his expression. Subtle, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. Because I wanted to see how far you would go, he said. A pause, then more quietly, and because I didn't want you to leave. My chest tightened painfully at the words, because that didn't make sense. None of this did. You should have, I said softly. You shouldn't trust me. He held my gaze, unwavering. That's not your decision to make. And just like that, everything I thought I understood shattered. Because the man I was trying to destroy had known all along. And instead of pushing me away, he had chosen to keep me close. Chapter 8. After that night, nothing felt the same. The air between us shifted in a way I couldn't ignore, heavy with truths that had finally been spoken and yet somehow left more unsaid. He knew. That was the one thought that wouldn't leave me. He had known all along, every lie, every calculated move, every hidden intention, and still, he had chosen to keep me close. I didn't understand it. I wasn't sure I wanted to, because understanding meant accepting something I wasn't ready to face. The next morning, everything continued as if nothing had happened. The office was the same, structured, efficient, precise. Meetings were held, decisions were made, conversations remained professional, and yet, every glance we exchanged carried something deeper beneath the surface, something unspoken but impossible to ignore. "The board meeting has been moved to 11, I said, placing the updated schedule on his desk. My voice was steady, practiced, controlled, just like before. He didn't respond immediately. His gaze lingered on the document for a moment before shifting to me. "You stayed late yesterday." Not a question, a statement. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. There was work to finish. His eyes held mine, searching not for information but for something else entirely. "You don't have to do that." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Because I knew he wasn't talking about work anymore. My fingers tightened slightly at my sides. "It's my responsibility." A pause, then quietly, "Is that the only reason you're still here?" The question hit harder than I expected, because I didn't have an answer, not one I could say out loud. I looked away first, focusing on the edge of his desk, on anything that would keep me from meeting his gaze. "I have things to do," I said, turning slightly as if to leave. "Elena." My name stopped me. I didn't move, couldn't, not when he said it like that, soft, steady, almost careful. I turned back slowly. He was already watching me, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, they were. There was something there I couldn't ignore anymore, something real. "Why are you still here?" he asked again. The question wasn't demanding. It wasn't forceful. It was patient, as if he was willing to wait for an answer I didn't even understand myself. My chest tightened, my thoughts tangled in a way that made it impossible to breathe properly. Because the truth had changed. It wasn't as simple as it used to be. I had come here for one reason, one purpose, but now that purpose didn't feel as solid as it once did. "I don't know," I admitted softly. The words felt unfamiliar, fragile in a way I wasn't used to, but they were honest. And for the first time since this began, honesty felt more dangerous than any lie I had told. His gaze softened slightly at my answer, not with pity, not with relief, but with something quieter, understanding. "Then figure it out," he said. Not a command, not an expectation, just a suggestion, a choice. And that was what made it so difficult. Because for the first time, this wasn't about strategy or planning or revenge. It wasn't about what I had come here to do. It was about what I wanted to do, and I didn't know the answer. I spent the rest of the day moving through tasks without really thinking, my mind caught between two paths I couldn't reconcile. One led back to the plan, the reason I started all of this, the truth I had been chasing, the justice I thought I needed. The other led to him, to the man who had seen through me and still chose not to turn away, to the moments that felt too real to be part of any lie, to something I hadn't planned for and didn't know how to control. That night, I stood alone in the office long after everyone had left, staring out at the city lights below. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, steady, composed, unrecognizable, because I wasn't the same person who walked in here weeks ago. Somewhere along the way, I had changed, and now I was left with a choice I didn't know how to make, because no matter what I decided, I was going to lose something, the truth, or him, and for the first time, I wasn't sure which one mattered more. Chapter 9. In the end, I told myself there was only one choice, that everything I had done, everything I had sacrificed led to this moment, and I couldn't walk away now. Doubt didn't matter. Feelings didn't matter. He didn't matter. That was what I repeated to myself as I sat in front of my laptop, the files open, the evidence incomplete but convincing enough to raise questions I knew would spiral into something bigger. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the undeniable truth I had once been searching for. But it was enough to damage him, enough to start something that couldn't be undone. My hands hovered over the keyboard for a moment longer than necessary. This was it, the line I couldn't uncross, the point where everything ended or began depending on how I chose to see it. I thought about my father, about the years we lost, about the anger I carried for so long it became part of who I was. And then, against my will, I thought about him, Alexander, the way he looked at me. The way he trusted me, even when he knew he shouldn't. The way he said my name like it meant something. My chest tightened painfully. I closed my eyes for a brief second, forcing the thoughts away. This wasn't about him. It was never supposed to be. With a slow breath, I pressed send. The moment felt quiet, too quiet for something that would change everything. There was no sound, no visible shift, just a single action that set everything in motion. But within minutes, the world reacted. Notifications started appearing. Messages, alerts, news headlines forming faster than I could process them. Questions were being asked, doubts were spreading. His name, his reputation was being pulled into something messy and uncertain. I stared at the screen, my expression unreadable even to myself. I should have felt something. Satisfaction, relief, closure. But there was nothing. Just a hollow, heavy silence settling inside me. Because somewhere along the way, this had stopped feeling like victory. I didn't wait. I couldn't. The moment everything went live, I shut my laptop and left. The office, the building, him, I didn't look back. I told myself it was because I didn't need to, because I had already done what I came here to do. But the truth was simpler. I didn't think I could face him. Hours passed in a blur. The city felt louder than usual, every sound sharper, every movement too fast. I walked without direction, without purpose, just trying to outrun something I couldn't name, until I couldn't anymore. I stopped, my breath unsteady, my thoughts catching up all at once. What had I done? The question came too late, because deep down I already knew the answer. I had chosen the past over the present, revenge over truth, and now there was no way to take it back. Running away won't change anything. His voice stopped me before I could move again. My entire body went still. Slowly I turned. He was standing a few steps away, his expression as controlled as ever, but his eyes, they were. There was something there I hadn't seen before, not anger, not coldness, something deeper, something that made it harder to breathe. "You shouldn't have come," I said quietly. My voice didn't sound like my own. He stepped closer, closing the distance between us without hesitation. "You think I would?" The question wasn't sharp. It wasn't accusing. It was certain. Like this had always been inevitable. I looked away, unable to hold his gaze for too long. "I did what I had to do." A pause, then softer, "You knew that." Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy with everything that had led us here. "I knew," he said finally, "but that doesn't make it easier." The words hit harder than anything else could have, because he wasn't denying it. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't even blaming me. And somehow that made it worse. I forced myself to look at him again, my chest tight with something I couldn't hold back anymore. "Then why are you here?" I asked. Because that was the one thing I didn't understand. After everything I had done, why was he still standing in front of me? He held my gaze, unwavering. "Because you are." Simple, direct, and devastating. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. This wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just revenge. It was loss. And not his, mine. Chapter 10. I didn't deserve him. That was the first thought that settled in my mind as the silence stretched between us, heavy with everything that had already been said, and everything that hadn't. I stood there, facing the man I had tried to destroy, the man I had betrayed in the most deliberate way possible, and still, he hadn't walked away. I couldn't understand it. Maybe I didn't want to, because understanding meant facing something I wasn't ready to accept. "You should hate me," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. It was the truth, the only truth that made sense after everything I had done. He didn't respond immediately. His gaze stayed on me, calm, unreadable, but not distant, not cold, just there, present in a way that made it impossible to escape the weight of the moment. "Would that make this easier for you?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. I frowned slightly, my thoughts faltering. "That's not the point." "Then what is?" His voice remained even, but there was something beneath it now, something quieter, something real. I didn't have an answer, because nothing about this was simple anymore. Not the past, not the truth, not him. I looked away, my chest tightening as the reality of everything pressed down on me. "I was wrong," I admitted softly. The words felt heavier than anything I had said before. "About you." About all of it. Saying it out loud made it real, irreversible, but it was the truth. The one thing I couldn't deny anymore. He didn't interrupt, didn't question me, he just listened. And somehow that made it harder to continue. "I thought I knew who you were," I said, my voice quieter now. "I thought I understood what happened to my family, but I didn't. I built everything on something that wasn't even real." I swallowed, forcing myself to meet his gaze again. "And I still chose to hurt you." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. This was it. The moment where everything should have ended, where he should have turned away, walked away, left me with the consequences of my choices. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped closer, slowly, deliberately, until the space between us disappeared entirely. My breath caught, my thoughts scattering in a way I couldn't control. You didn't know, he said quietly. That doesn't change what I did. No, he agreed. It doesn't. A pause, then softer, but it changes why. I felt something in my chest crack at his words because he wasn't excusing me. He wasn't pretending it didn't matter, he just understood, and that was what made it unbearable. I don't expect you to forgive me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You shouldn't. He studied me for a moment, his gaze steady, searching not for weakness, not for regret, but for something deeper. Something I didn't know how to give. That's not your decision to make, he said finally. The words were familiar. He had said them before, but now they meant something different. Because this time they weren't about trust. They were about choice, his choice, to stay, to stand here, to not walk away when he had every reason to. My chest tightened painfully, my emotions finally breaking through the control I had been holding onto for so long. Why? I asked, my voice unsteady for the first time. Why would you stay after this? The question felt fragile, uncertain, like I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. He didn't hesitate. Because I choose you. The words were simple, but they shattered something inside me completely. I stared at him, unable to process it at first. Even now, I asked, my voice barely there. Even after everything, his expression didn't change. I knew who you were before you ever told me, he said. And I still chose you then. A pause, then, that hasn't changed. The world seemed to still around us, everything else fading into the background, because nothing had ever felt this real, this overwhelming, this impossible to ignore. I felt my vision blur slightly, emotions I had buried for so long finally surfacing all at once. I don't deserve that, I whispered. He stepped closer, his presence steady, unwavering. Maybe not, he said quietly, but I'm giving you the choice anyway. A choice, not control, not expectation, just a choice. And for the first time since this began, I understood what that meant. This wasn't about the past anymore. It wasn't about revenge or truth or everything I had been chasing for so long. It was about what came next, about whether I would keep running or finally stop. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something shift inside me, clear and certain in a way nothing else had been. I had already lost so much chasing something that wasn't real. I wasn't going to lose this too. Slowly, I closed the distance between us, my voice quiet but steady. Then I choose you too. And for the first time, it wasn't part of a plan. The end. This was brought to you by Romance Hobbit. Thank you for watching.